The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus departed from there and came to his native place, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What kind of wisdom has been given him? What mighty deeds are wrought by his hands? Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joses and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his native place and among his own kin and in his own house." So he was not able to perform any mighty deeds there, apart from curing a few sick people by laying his hands on them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. The Gospel of the Lord.
For when I am weak, then I am strong. These are words that sometimes sound nice and maybe even holy in spiritual conversations. But what could they possibly mean in our day-to-day lives, where we are all about strength and accomplishments and racing to the top and staying on the top and being number one? For when I am weak, then I am strong. We live in a world where people sign off on emails and letters with the word best. This annoys me to no end. Best what? Best Buy? Best show on the road? Best showing at the 4-H fair? Best chili in Texas? The best show in town? I often wonder what all those people are doing with the time they save by not writing best wishes or best regards, just best. So I usually sign my emails as average or in the 20th percentile, something like that. You might think I'm making something out of nothing. And though I would often like to be God, who does make something out of nothing, I'll leave that to God. I think the constant use of the word best gets into our consciousness in a kind of unhealthy way, and it can encourage us to not be honest about our weaknesses or faults or failings and the very important role they can play in our lives. We all want to be best. That doesn't leave much room for faults and weaknesses and failings and sins. Here's another example. Every workshop, every conference, every seminar you go to today always has a thing called best practices. When I submit a proposal for a talk I'm going to give, I always say, I'm going to talk about worst practices. Now, these kinds of proposals are usually turned down by the organizers because God forbid that someone should actually be honest and talk about all that one has learned from failures. and from faults and from doing things incorrectly. Let's be honest. Most of us have learned much more about how to be from our faults and our weaknesses than we have from our strengths and virtues. And yet there's such an aversion to talking about worst practices. Meanwhile, the church has always taught us that there are certain kinds of success that grow best in the soil of failure. If we did not learn from our failures, if we did not learn from our worst practices, from our sins, then what purpose would the cross have in our lives? Why would we hold the cross as central to our lives? Why would we say, as we do in the Congregation of Holy Cross, that the cross is our only hope? To say that the cross is our only hope is not poetry. To say that there is no failure that the Lord's love cannot reverse is not a sentimental thought. It's the truth. To believe that the cross is our only hope, and to believe that there is no failure that the Lord's love cannot reverse, is to believe and to hope with our whole being. The words of Paul, "When I am weak, then I am strong." Perhaps the sin that people most confess when they come to confession is they pass judgment on others. And a close second, actually a sibling of that sin, is that people will confess that they're proudful, pride. Father, I'm a proud person. I'm prideful. So many of us struggle with this sin, especially when we're consumed with being the best. Fortunately, there's a remedy for this sin, but nobody likes it. Depending on the degree of pride in your life, God gives you, as he gave St. Paul, a thorn in your side, so that, as Paul says, it keeps me from being too elated. God is faithful to each one of us. So faithful, he will definitely give you a sin or a fault or a weakness that you cannot conquer, you cannot fix. A weakness you cannot turn a corner on. You try, and you will struggle your whole life. You will go forwards and backwards, sideways and sideways, up and down. But God will give you this so that you don't get too taken with your greatness, to keep you from being too elated. This fault, this sin, this weakness, whatever it is, will keep you grounded in humility. It will keep you close to the earth, close to yourself, and close to others. You can, of course, deny this weakness, this sin, this fault, and pretend you don't have it. This only increases your pride, your being judgmental, and makes you otherwise impossible to live with and to be around. So the key is that you have to acknowledge this and accept it, and even embrace this weakness, this fault, this sin. Don't take this the wrong way, as though I'm saying sin is good. I'm not exactly saying that. What I am saying is it can have a real purpose in our lives. For God's sake, I've got so many, they better have a purpose in my life. As we say in Spanish, Dios se vale de todo, which means God makes use of everything. Everything. So do not despair, do not quit, do not give in. Paul writes, in the midst of the thorn in his side, while he is begging Jesus to take it from him, Paul writes, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness." This passage from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians is so consoling, so hopeful, so reassuring to those of us who know ourselves as sinners whose sins are forgiven by God. as sinners who know that God's mercy can make them strong and even effective, even in their sinfulness. God's mercy is always at work in our lives, always accomplishing His word and His work in our lives. So do not deny or do not run away from, do not be afraid of your faults and weaknesses and sins and failures. If you do, you might be running away from what God can do through you through those things. You will never know, if you run from those things, what it might mean for His power to be made strong in your weakness. Trusting in God's relentless mercy makes it possible for us to embrace our whole self and to allow God's power to shine through our weakness and how much good it might accomplish. It might even keep you from signing your emails best.